This video is going to focus on the first of the two federalism mandatory Supreme Court cases, and this is the 1819 case of McCulloch versus Maryland. So, the background information on this case is that the national government is trying to open up a bank within the state of Maryland. This would be a bank that would actually be run by the federal government. So it'd be a little bit more sophisticated than the bank that you might be thinking about, right? That is like your local bank that you deposit money in and things like that. But it is a bank that at the end of the day would be run by the federal government. The state of Maryland has no interest in allowing the national government to operate a bank within its borders because they kind of look at it as unnecessary competition for their own state run banks. So they begin to think of a reason on how they can argue against the existence of a nationally run bank within the state of Maryland. And one of the arguments they make is that nowhere in Article 1, Section 8, where Congress's powers are actually listed, does it say that the national government has the ability to open or operate a bank. So they are arguing that it's unconstitutional. So in the meantime, because they know this is going to take a while to resolve this dispute with the federal government, the state of Maryland tries to close the national bank branch in Maryland by excessively taxing it in an attempt to force it to close its doors early. James McCulloch is the director of the national bank, and he believes that the state of Maryland does not have the power to tax the national bank. So he actually sues, which is why it's McCulloch versus Maryland, against the states for their right to actually have taxes dropped on the national bank. So there are really two issues that have to be resolved in this case. The first issue is, can the federal government actually operate a bank if the word bank's not listed in the Constitution? And number two, can state governments actually tax parts of the federal government? The first issue is, can the national government create a bank if the word bank isn't listed actually in the Constitution? So the part of the Constitution that is being debated in this case is the necessary and proper clause and the commerce clause. Why? It's because the national government admits that the word bank is not in the Constitution. But the argument they're making is the necessary and proper clause, which we talked about, allows them to do things that are not listed in the Constitution as long as what they want to do can be linked up or connected to something that is listed. So in this particular case, they're linking up a bank to commerce, which is in the Constitution. Remember, we talked about commerce as a synonym for economy. It's very generic. So the argument that the federal government's making is that a bank will help them regulate commerce. So therefore, it should be allowed. The holding, and this is a key word for decision, is 7-0. It's a unanimous decision in favor of the national government and against the state of Maryland. The Supreme Court agrees with the national government and says that, yes, a bank is constitutional because it's close enough to one of their stated powers, which is commerce. What makes this case absurdly important is that it is the Supreme Court basically saying, from this point forward, we are okay with the national government doing more than what's listed in Article 1, Section 8, as long as what they want to do can be linked up to something that is. And this dramatically expands the power of the federal government and is a major loss for state sovereignty and state power. Issue number two that has to be resolved is, what about Maryland taxing the national bank, the bank run by the national government? Can the state of Maryland actually tax something that belongs to the national government? This time, the connection is the supremacy clause. And that's because the national government's argument is that they are supreme to the states and that the tax indicates some sort of control over somebody. So the national government could tax the states because the national government is supreme to the states. But the states shouldn't be able to tax the national government because, again, the national government is supreme to the states. The holding or decision in this case is, again, a unanimous decision in favor of the federal government, that no, Maryland cannot tax the national government. And the importance of this is that it just reinforces the idea of national sovereignty and supremacy right over the states. That to tax somebody indicates control over them, and that the states don't control the national government, but the national government has some degree of control over the states. So McCulloch versus Maryland is a massive victory on both issues for the national government and a massive blow to state government powers on both issues.